All right, so this should be the last video. I'm sorry, I know today was a lot of me talking and I apologize. But the last one here is on square. So all of you know square, four congruent sides, four right angles. We've known that shape for a long, long time. So when we look at this, we're really just looking at it in perspective of the connection to the big idea of parallelograms and all of the types of parallelograms that are underneath that. So when I look at this, so if a quadrilateral is both, what we're going to actually say a rectangle and a rhombus. All right, because a rectangle would give you the four congruent side angles, so four right angles, and rhombus would give you the four congruent sides. All right, then we can say it is a square. All right, so if we were doing a lot of proof this year, we'd do a lot of prove it's a rectangle, prove it's a rhombus, and then once we had those two, we could make the conclusion that it was a square. All right, this is going to be more behind the scenes with the types of problems we're going to see this year. All right, now what this means is that all the properties of parallelograms, rectangles, and rhombi are true for a square. So really, when you hit a square, you get virtually every rule that we've talked about up to this point in our graphic organizer. All right, and we get one additional rule. All right, that is if a quadrilateral is a rectangle and a rhombus, then it is a square, which really, it didn't give me a whole lot. All right, it just tells me what we said above. So if we go back to our graphic organizer here real quick, all right, we're moving down to this bottom one, all right, which is a square. So we get four right angles. All right, we get four congruent sides. And then we get every single property above. So you could really pick like any of those choices above, and we could keep listing them here. But it's really like all of the ones above. So we're not going to restate them here. We're just going to leave that they are back above. All right, some notable ones and things that do come up, though, is the diagonals, because they're congruent, because it's a rectangle. All right, we also know they bisect each other, so we get all four of these pieces are the same size. All right, that's one of the ones that we get with this. Also, another thing we get is we get that each of these angles, all right, ends up being congruent because we have all of the angles are 90 degrees, and we know because it's a rhombus, the diagonals bisect opposite angles, so it cuts each of those into 45. All right, so those are some little things that happen to come up in a square, but again, it's because of all of those other properties that are before it. It's not really a new property. All right, so if we jump back into the notes here, in the notes, we've got a couple problems. So it says quadrilateral JKLM, all right, is a square. So it's telling you it's quadrilateral and it's a square. It says LP is 3x plus 7. All right, and MK, the other full diagonal, is 26. Find the value of x. So we really got two ways to approach this. We know the diagonals are congruent, right? And we know they bisect each other. So my approach would be I'd split this one to the 13 and 13, and then I would set the 3x plus 7 equal to the 13. Subtract 7, so we have 3x equals 6, and then we get x equals 2. All right, and that would be one route we could go. Now the other route we could go is, since we know the diagonals bisect each other, we could have brought a 3x plus 7 up there. Then I could say 3x plus 7 plus 3x plus 7 equals 26. All right, 6x plus 14 equals 26. 6x equals 12 when we subtract that 14 over. X equals 2. All right, and this is an either-or approach. Both of them work. I don't want you to rule something out just because it's not the exact way I did it. In math, it's the beauty of math is there's lots of ways to get through a problem. It's about the problem solving and finding a way that makes sense to you. All right, so if I jump on to 2, 2 says ABCD is a square. All right, first thing it asks us to find is AD. Now you'll notice they labeled this one 10. So I can go around if it's a square and say all the sides are 10. All right, so AD, another side, would also have to be 10. And they ask us to find the value of x. So x is in that corner, but we know all the corners are 90 degrees. All right, so we're going to say 2x plus 10 equals 90. That means 2x equals 80, or x equals 40. All right, so we've got that value of x. And again, we're just using the fact on that one that all sides are congruent and all the angles are 90 degrees. All right, moving into our last problem that I'm going to talk you through today. all right, is number 3. It says, name all the classifications um, of each quadrilateral. So we're going to go through our list of options, and we're going to determine which this possibly lands in. All right, so we're going to start with this first one here. All right, and first thing that I notice with this is I notice that I have diagonals that bisect each other. All right, if diagonals bisect each other, it is a parallelogram. All right, so that is the classification we could give for this one. All right, next thing I notice is I notice that the diagonals are perpendicular. All right, if the diagonals are perpendicular, that puts me in rhombus. All right, as long as we already know it's a parallelogram. So we know this is a rhombus. All right, next thing I notice is I notice that I've got a tick mark here and a tick mark here. All right, so I'm going to think of that full diagonal as 2 tick marks. All right, on the other side, I've got a tick mark and a tick mark, so that diagonal is also 2 tick marks long. All right, so in total, the diagonals are congruent. Because the diagonals are congruent, we know it's a rectangle. All right, and if it's a rectangle and a rhombus, we know that we have a square. All right, so this one actually falls into all of the categories for us. All right, it's a parallelogram, all right, and that's because diagonals bisect. All right, it's a rhombus because diagonals are perpendicular. It's a rectangle because diagonals are congruent. And it's a square because it's a rhombus and a rectangle. All right, so those are really all the classifications coming out of our list that we have so far that first one would fall into. All right, remember, this is a representative drawing. It's not necessarily like saying that the shape you're seeing is the shape it is. All it's saying is that this is like a representation of some shape that has 4 sides. All right, so if I look at the next one, all right, in the next one, first thing that I notice is I've got a pair of opposite sides that are both parallel and congruent. All right, and when I have a pair of opposite sides that are both parallel and congruent, that is a parallelogram. All right, so one pair, opposite sides, parallel and congruent. All right, so we have a parallelogram. Now, the next thing I notice is I notice these 2 markings here. All right, we know consecutive angles have to be supplementary in a parallelogram. All right, but those 2 are congruent. And the only way that we can have 2 congruent angles be supplementary or add to 180 is if they're both 90. All right, so the fact that those 2 are congruent forces each of those to 90. Opposite angles are congruent, so those are both 90 as well. All right, so now I've got 4 right angles, which tells me this is also a rectangle. All right, and again, that's because consecutive angles are supplementary. All right, and given 2 congruent consecutive angles. All right, so we had the consecutive angles that are congruent, so we know they have to be supplementary. The only way that can happen is if they're both 90. All right, and that's going to take us through the problems for today's notes. Now, just giving you a quick glance, the homework for today is going to kind of be broken into sections. All right, so the first section, which I'd like you to do odds on. All right, so this is odds. All right, the first section is going to go through, and it's going to be like very algebraic-y type problem-solving problems. What shape is it? What do you know? What equation do we set up? All right, then the second group is going to go through, and it's really going to focus in on what properties or what shapes have a given property. So the diagonals are congruent. All right, what shapes is that true for? All right, so this is still going to be odd. All right, and then the last part in the last page here, all right, really focuses in on, and it says name all the classifications. I think this is probably the toughest page out of this. All right, so we're going to spend a lot of time tomorrow in class talking through this page, but this is the one where we really got to watch out. It's just like those last 2 problems. What do we know? What can we figure out? So for example, in something like 14 here, all right, notice that because this angle and this angle are congruent, that actually tells me that those two sides are parallel. All right, the other two tell me these two sides are parallel. And then from there, I have parallelogram, and I have to see, can I come up with another possibility from that? All right. But again, I find this page to be one of the toughest ones. But it's going to run you through and kind of make sure that you understand all of those properties that we're dealing with. Tomorrow's a day 2, so we'll definitely get a little bit more time with this. And then what we're going to do is we're going to move out of parallelograms. We're going to move into some other quadrilaterals like trapezoids and kites and get some properties. And that should set us up to review for a little while and then land on our exam right before winter break. So that Wednesday and Thursday would be when we're testing this chapter. And then you can have a nice relaxing winter break. And when we come back, we'll start into a little mini unit on transformations. All right, I hope that helps. I will be seeing you guys in class tomorrow, and then I'll have another video ready for you to go on Wednesday. All right, hope that was helpful. Odds on this homework. Have a great day.